So I'm gonna be honest, they let me pick my intro song, and I had this vision that when it came on, I was gonna like run on stage and really like dance and own it, and that is not what happened. So I want you all to just pretend that that's what happened and just cheer a little bit, just cheer a little bit. Like, man, that girl can dance. Wow, yes, yes. So I want you all to imagine for a second that you're in 4th grade. We've all been there, right? So think about you in 4th grade. What does the building that you went to school in look like? Who are the students sitting around you? What is the routine of your day like? And then I want you to ask yourself, if I could change one thing about my school, what would it be? At age 9, I was asked this question. I was standing on a stage, sort of like this, way more intimidated because I was 9. It was the first time I had been on a stage and had to speak in front of a large group of people. So somehow, I had found myself in the top 5 finalists for the Little Future Miss Virginia pageant. Now, if you've never been in a pageant or seen one on TV, let me explain how this works. When you get down to 5 or less finalists, they call you out on stage one by one, and they make you answer a question. When you are on stage is the first time you have ever heard this question. So you have a limited amount of time to answer. So in this time period, if you are not on stage, they put you in what they call the soundproof booth. Now for Little Future Miss Virginia, what this was you standing behind stage behind the curtain, and an adult just put their hand over your ears and clasped really hard and was like, "Don't listen." So I really don't remember the order of the contestants. I just know that I wasn't contestant 1, 2, or 3 because I have been retold this story many times. So what happened was the first 3 contestants or so walk out on stage. They're asked the question, if you could change one thing in your school, what would it be? They immediately answered without skipping a beat because obviously what was most important to an honor roll elementary school student was better food in the cafeteria. You all remember that pizza. It was terrible. So I can't say that I completely disagree, right? Like better food in the school cafeteria. Since then, it has sort of been fixed, so that's great, right? I, on the other hand, walked out on stage and took 10 seconds to really think about it. I said to myself, okay, if I could change one thing, what would it be? After about 10 seconds, I looked out into the crowd with a smirk on my face, knowing my parents were watching, and I said, the rules. So this is where my answer sort of took a departure from where one might think from a 9-year-old. So what you might think that I said was, we shouldn't have any rules, we don't need them, there's too many of them. But instead what I said was, the rules that we have are not working. Kids are coming to school, they're totally out of control, the teachers can't do anything about it. We have got to get some better rules, right? And so I just think that we really should be rethinking the rules that surround us every day, right? So school could have been sort of like a metaphor for society, right? There's rules happening around us every day. I even think about this morning. This morning I woke up and I ate eggs and toast for breakfast. Eggs and toast are a breakfast food. That is an unwritten rule, right? We all know it. Certain foods are for breakfast, certain foods are for lunch, and certain foods are for dinner. So now we're gonna take a quiz. Don't worry, you'll all ace it. It's only 3 questions and it's multiple choice, everyone's favorite, right? So your options are breakfast, lunch, or dinner. If you know it, just shout the answer out. So pancakes are for, sandwiches are for, pork chops are for. Very, very good. Told you, you all would ace it. You did a great job, right? So some of you might disagree with this rule, right? There's always exceptions. So for those of us who are exceptionally lazy, we will eat cereal for dinner. For those of us who love pizza, we will eat pizza at any time of the day because pizza is the one food when I was a kid that could withstand germs. You know what I mean. You order the pizza comes in the middle of the night, you eat the pizza. You leave the pizza in the box on the counter. right? You leave it on the counter, you don't touch it, you don't put it in the fridge, you go to sleep. You wake up the next day, do you put that pizza in the microwave? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, right? Sometimes you just eat it right out of the box. Like, no rules about pizza, love it, great. So this leads me to tell you that not all rules apply everywhere. So if you were to go to Korea, any of these foods can be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, right? Rules are different everywhere. So there's 3 points that I would like to make, and that is my first one. So not just with food, but with other things as well. So if you were to travel out of the country, one of the things that you should know is that customs in different countries mean different things. So in America, we think of eye contact as being a positive trait, right? If I'm in a conversation with you and I lock eyes with you, you're thinking, man, this girl is really interested in what I have to say, right? I have got her attention. This is good. If you were to go to China and do the same thing, you may not get the same reaction. So eye contact in China means that someone is angry with you. And if I lock eyes with you, I'm like, I dare you. I dare you, right? It's a challenge. But you don't know that. So you sort of have to educate yourself on what the rules are, where you are. Because even here in America, in Native American culture, eye contact is actually thought of as being disrespectful. It's rude. And so you need to sort of educate yourself on what the customs are wherever you are. So just because we are taught that something is polite or correct does not mean that that is the rule everywhere. We just need to educate ourselves on what the rules are when we're in those positions. The second point I'd like to make is that rules can become outdated. So on an individual level, we are taught as children, don't talk to strangers. This makes complete sense when you're little. Everybody is not your friend. You have to learn that. But as you get older, you want to talk to strangers. Some of my most interesting conversations have been with people that I didn't know, people that didn't look like me, people that didn't come from where I come from, people who think differently. That is how we learn. So those rules become outdated as we outgrow them. But society can also outgrow rules. So there are lots of large examples of this, right? There were laws in place that used to support things like slavery or discrimination, and those rules have since changed. But you can even go a little below that and think on a simpler level. So who remembers this? Yes. Now you're like, dang, she is older than I thought she was. Because this is how I used to write my research papers. Now, for those of you who don't know what this is, and I'm sure there's a few of you, I'm not going to call you out. I'll explain it to you. This is a card catalog. Now, when you used to write a research paper, what would happen is the teacher would give you the outlines, and I'm not going to lie, the internet existed when I was in school, but it wasn't pervasive. So, not everyone even had a computer at home, let alone dial-up internet. So if you wanted to write your research paper, you had to have at least 2 sources that were a physical book. So what that meant is you had to go to the library and do your research. Now, remember, computers, not pervasive. So when you get to the library, you have this. So you have to know the last name of the author of the book that you want. So you find the drawer that has the last names. The drawers are all in alphabetical order. You pull the drawer out, you find the card with the author's last name on it and the title of the book that you're looking for. And then in the corner of the card is a call number. And the call number is how you find the book within all the stacks of the library, because the library used to have lots of books in it. Some libraries today just don't even have any books at all. So, nice little history lesson for you. So just something to keep in mind. Rules can become outdated because as society evolves, rules evolve, right? So the technology advanced, society advanced, and then the rules followed. This is generally how that's supposed to work. So the last point I'd like to make is strict adherence to the rules can be extreme. In society, we tend to take things to the absolute extreme. Who here has worked in customer service? Wonderful. So I started my work career as a hostess, a waitress, and a bartender at restaurants. And I have also worked behind the counter in retail. So if you've worked in customer service, you have probably heard the phrase, the customer is always right. Wrong. The customer is not always right. I know. I've met those customers. And so that's fine, but maybe we should rethink that rule, right? If that's a rule that we're going to give to our employees, maybe the rule should be something more like, the customer's opinion is always valued. So I'm going to listen to what you have to say. I might not necessarily do exactly what you hope the outcome will be, but I'm going to take your thoughts into consideration. So I don't just want to use secular examples, right? This is a church conference, so I want you to know that God gave me this message, all right? So if you look at the 10 Commandments, there's one that says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So if you look at Mark 2:23 through 24, it says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Then he, Jesus, said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So I would translate that to say, the rules were made for the good of the people, not the people to live at the mercy of the rules. Rules were intended to govern. They're supposed to make, obedience in society so that we can all move forward together. It's a positive thing that we have rules, that rules are in place. But when you are too strict about how you adhere to the rules and you're not flexible to evolve as society evolves, that is when we get into some slight troubles, right? So to recap the 3 points, every rule does not apply everywhere. Rules can become outdated, and strict adherence to the rules can be extreme. All of these 3 things really boil down to one point, and that's that context matters. So where you are matters to whether you should listen to a rule. Who you are with matters. What the date and time is matters. Not every rule is meant to apply in every situation. And as time goes on, we really have to think about how we're applying these rules and if we are re-examining them so that they are really working in the best interest of where we as a society are today. So with that, how are we going to apply this? Like, what are we going to do with this information now that we have this realization? So once you identify some rules that maybe aren't working for you, I want you to ask yourself these 5 questions. Who made the rule? When did they make the rule? Why did they make the rule? Who does this benefit? And is it aligned with God's will? So I have an example for each of these. So who made the rule? In fashion, there are unwritten rules everywhere. You've probably heard them, right? No white pants after Labor Day. Don't wear navy with blue. Let's be honest, nobody's listening to these. Wear whatever you want, right? So the one thing that I do notice people listening to, though, is don't wear the same outfit twice when there are cameras, right? We all wear the same outfit twice, but if I've already been in that outfit on Instagram, we got to get a new outfit. They've already seen that one. And so one of the best things that I saw last year on the red carpet was my girl, Tiffany Haddish. Now, if you don't know who Tiffany Haddish is, she's an actress and comedian, and she is now my fashion shero. So Tiffany, at the premiere of the movie Girls Trip, wore a $4,000 Alexander McQueen dress. Now, I, like Tiffany, would think to myself, if I spent $4,000 on anything, I'm gonna wear that dress as many times as I want, right? Hollywood doesn't think like that, but Tiffany, she's not Hollywood, right? So she wore this dress not only to the premiere of Girls Trip, but then she wore it on SNL. And then she wore it to the Oscars. And then she wore it again to the MTV TV and Movie Awards. My hero, right? Job well done. So the next question that we ask is, when did they make the rule? So as we're growing up, we learn grammar, right? So he is supposed to be representative of the individual male. She is supposed to be representative of the female. And they is supposed to be representative of a group of people. Now, I looked into the history of this, and grammar dates back to the 15th century. In the English language, the rules of grammar were made in response to the printing press. So when the printing press was invented, all of a sudden, you could mass disseminate information. Now, in order for that to be effective, we all have to be playing by the same rules as we're writing. And so thus was the birth of grammar. So fast forward to today, the rules are a little bit different when we think about pronouns. So you may all have been paying attention that gender is not necessarily looked at as binary anymore. It's more of like a spectrum, right? So if somebody is not identifying as male or as female and maybe identifies somewhere along the spectrum, do you call them he or do you call them she? You actually call them they. This is where the rule has evolved, right? Because as we discussed, rules become outdated. So we have to think about, when did they create the rule? The third question is, why did they make the rule? So for many of us, when we go to work, our pay is commensurate with the amount of time we put into that job. And the amount of time we put into that job is probably linked to how many hours we sit at a desk or how many hours we are in a certain place. Now, this doesn't apply to every job, but for some jobs, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like, you can do that job from anywhere, and you actually might be more productive from somewhere else. So when you're thinking about the rules, you're like, why is this in place? The rule is in place because we want you to do this work to make this outcome. So should your pay be tied to hours, or should your pay be tied to outcomes? And for every job, that's going to look a little bit different, but it's just one lens to look at this question through. The next question is, who does it benefit? So in my job at Leadership Metro Richmond, I am tasked with planning retreats for our Leadership Quest class. It's a leadership program. So one of the first things that you do in Leadership Quest is you go away on an overnight retreat. So when I first started in this role, one of my first tasks was to plan said overnight retreat. There was a young man in the class who had a physical disability. He was in a wheelchair. Now, in my 9 years of event planning before I took this job, to my knowledge, I had never planned an event for anyone with a physical disability. I had never had anyone close to me in my life with a physical disability. And so I really had to think about, when I'm going in and planning these things, if I were in his shoes, how would I be able to maneuver around? Now, you might think to yourself, well, there are rules for that. There's ADA compliance, the American Disabilities Act. But if you really look into those laws, they actually do not protect everyone with a physical disability. Depending on the severity of your disability, it may help you or it may not. So sometimes when you think about who stands to benefit, it's not necessarily who is benefiting or who is not, but who also is being forgotten. So I'll give you an example from this. I'm planning this, and we're in Colonial Williamsburg, so as you can imagine, ADA compliance is already a problem because those buildings are historic. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, where are stairs? Stairs are going to be an obstacle. So I'm like, this building has an elevator, we're good. The elevator is for freight. Freight is for carrying deliveries, not for carrying people. So because it's for carrying freight, it's in the back. The bathroom breaks are 5 minutes long. Now, as an able-bodied person, I know that 5 minutes is not quite long enough depending on the number of stalls, right? So as a person in a wheelchair, if I have to find the elevator, then take the elevator, then from the elevator, go find the bathroom, then get back to the elevator, and then get back down, you can understand where I'm going with this, right? So this is really important that we think about, who are the rules benefiting, who are they not benefiting, and who might we be leaving out? And then the last question is, does this align with God's will? So with that, let's look at Matthew 22:36. One of the Pharisees asks, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second like it is love your neighbor as yourself." That second piece has come to be known as the golden rule. So this is the ultimate rule. When we are rethinking the little rules in our everyday life and the rules that govern society, what we really should be thinking is, do they align with the number one rule, which is are we loving God and are we loving our neighbors as ourselves? So if you decide that it does not follow that rule and you decide not to follow it, you may actually be following the path of Jesus. In Matthew 8:2-3, it reads, "A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said. 'Be clean.' Immediately, he was cleansed of his leprosy." Sometimes we have to rethink the rules and step out of line in favor of doing what is right. So to bring this full circle, when I was 9, I was thinking about the rules that were on me as a 9-year-old girl. School mostly, right? School and rules at home by my parents. As a 32-year-old, I am thinking to myself, what are the rules that are governing me every day when I'm on the road in my car, when I'm at my office, when I'm in my home, when I'm out in society? But not just what are the rules and how can I rethink them, but what can I do about it? So this year, I had the pleasure of serving on the Virginia Ratify ERA campaign. Now, I'm not here to sway your political opinion. All I'm here to say is that the Constitution was made to govern the United States, but not necessarily in the best interest of women or with women in mind at all. Women have been fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment for over 100 years. This is a long-term game. So when we start thinking about rethinking the rules, we have to realize that these things aren't going to happen overnight. And our young people have come to this realization. Style Weekly ran a cover page story about 3 weeks ago about a group of high school students who spent their MLK Day holiday at the General Assembly. What they were doing is they were talking to legislators about gun laws, because they see the violence that is happening in our schools, and they thought to themselves, the laws are not made to protect us. And instead of waiting for someone else to do it, we're going to go and we're going to have the voice ourselves. Now, these students were all about 16 that were interviewed in this article. So they're not even old enough to vote. They still have 2 more years before they can have their voice heard at the ballot. But they realize that they can still do something. So I'm asking you now, if you could change one thing about society, what would it be? You can turn on the news at any given moment, and your options are numerous. You could pick immunization. You could pick immigration. You could pick police brutality. The choice is yours. But once you think about, what would I like to change about society? I want you to try to identify the rules in society that have gotten us to where we are today. And so once you identify those rules, we go back to our 5 questions. Who made the rule? When did they make the rule? Why did they make the rule? Who was it intended to benefit? And is it aligned with God's will? And so, unlike when I was on stage at 9 and they asked me to answer this question, and really all they were looking for was just a verbal response, I am asking you and saying, now what are you going to do about it? You don't have to tell me your topic, and you don't have to tell me what your action plan is, but I want you to think about it, because we all have a voice, and we all can not only rethink the rules, but we can change them. Thank you.